Roads closed, skies white. My small-town hardware store became a lighthouse when the blizzard roared in, corralling strangers and neighbors into one flickering circle of heat. Among them stood Evan, cheeks flushed, snow glittering in his beard, the man I'd quietly admired through shared coffees and polite nods. As the wind walled us in, so did a different pressure, a hush that made every glance feel louder. There, beneath lantern glow and drifting breath, our feelings found no exits, only doors. Inside. If this warmed you, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the channel with friends who treasure gentle, heart-steadying stories, tender moments. The funny thing about emergencies is how ordinary they can look when you're the one who's been preparing for them. I had winterized the front door with plastic sheeting the day before, braced the back exit with a sandbag, and set out a crate of extra wool socks by the counter with a handwritten sign. Take one if you need one. I'll order more. When the county sent the push notification about road closures, the bell above the hardware store door kept chiming anyway, each ring like a heartbeat. People came in off the white streets with their faces shining from cold, scarves stiff with ice. We spread tarps and rugs and turned the paint aisle into a sort of parlor, seats made of upside-down buckets and a couple of camping chairs I pulled from aisle 7. The storm took its time showing its teeth, then bared them all at once. The world beyond the glass went powder and blur, the plows lost the fight, and the wind made the old building groan like a ship. Evan pushed in last, because of course he would be the man who made sure everyone else got inside first. He held the door for the Ramirez kids, brushed the snow off Mr. Deacon's hat with a gloved hand, and gave Mrs. Callahan his scarf like he'd been planning to all along. When he finally turned toward me, that grin of his came out careful, warmer than the propane heater's hiss. Snow clung to his beard as if it wanted to stay. He gave me a simple nod that went straight through all my winter layers. "You really turned this place into a haven," he said, voice pitched low, respectful of the hush storms somehow carry inside them. "We've got kerosene lanterns, a battery radio, and enough instant cocoa to keep a church youth group happy. I can't offer much more, but—" I lifted the box of hand warmers like a game show host. "Door prize." He laughed softly and tapped the box, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a Ziploc bag fat with tea bags. "My contribution. Chamomile and mint. There was a run on coffee at the IGA, but apparently no one thinks of tea." He set the bag gently on the counter like it was medicine, which in a way it would be, and I noticed the way his fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary before letting go. I'd noticed a lot about Evan since he'd moved back 2 winters ago. How he checked on his mother every day at lunch. How he offered to shovel the alley behind the diner so Davy's mom wouldn't have to. How he listened to people with his whole attention like he was catching a signal only he could hear. How, when we got coffee at the same time at Dot's, his hand sometimes brushed mine when we both reached for the sugar, and he didn't flinch away. My admiration had started small, a seed under frost, and grown into a steady something that was less crush and more recognition. It had been a long time since I'd let myself feel that way. Life had turned me cautious. A return to town after my father's stroke. A breakup that felt like a winter of its own. Old dreams folded and set on a shelf. When the first gust shook the front door hard enough to rattle the bell, I slid the deadbolt. The click sounded like a ceremony. The blizzard had us. We had each other. We ran that night the way you run a little ship. I delegated tasks without making it sound like orders. Evan moved with quiet purpose, stacking cases of bottled water where people could reach them, rearranging the camping aisle so cots could fit side by side without blocking the way to the bathroom. The neon light from the window flickered and went out with a soft pew as the power gave up. We cheered when the propane heater caught and the blue flame turned steady. I set a big pot on a camp stove and stirred broth from a box into a gallon of water, adding noodles I'd meant to restock and a few packets of chicken bouillon that had seen better days. It smelled better than it had any right to. "You're saving morale with that smell," Mr. Deacon said, settling himself on a stack of lumber and wrestling off his boots, with the dignity of a retired mailman, who had once delivered in 3 feet of snow and did not, like being made to sit still. "We're going to make it more than morale," I promised. Mrs. Callahan, do you have that bag of carrots you always keep in your purse? She patted the enormous handbag she called baby. Always, and celery. I don't go anywhere without soup in my future. People laughed, and I cut carrots with my box cutter, which wasn't ideal, but got the job done. Evan lifted the pot with a careful, sure grip and set it where the heat would kiss the sides without scorching. When he looked up, his eyes met mine across steam and lantern shimmer. He smiled like we were sharing a secret. Maybe we were. The storm made a music of its own, wind at the eaves, the faint chime of a loose bit of metal on the sign outside, the soft hush of people speaking to each other in the way people do when they're thrown together by weather and fate. It is one of the things I love about this place, about this country, really. When trouble blows in, we find blankets and stories and ways to huddle. We told ours one after the other, like a string of bulbs lighting. The Ramirez kids explained Nintendo to Mr. Deacon, who pretended not to understand so they would keep explaining and stay distracted from worry. Mrs. Callahan showed me pictures of her late husband in his Navy uniform, her finger tracing the air over his face like a prayer. Evan pulled off his gloves and flexed his fingers before taking a mug of tea and sitting beside me on the drop cloth I'd spread like a picnic blanket. "Your hands okay?" I asked. "They're talking," he said, "but nothing serious. I could use the excuse for you to hold them, though." He said it lightly, but his eyes didn't leave mine. The breath between us seemed to deepen. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks in a way that had nothing to do with the camp stove. I had learned to let compliments pass over me with a smile, learned to protect the quiet parts, but he had a way of making me feel like hiding was impolite. I offered my hands. He took them steadily, palms warm, calluses mapped like a story of work and care. He didn't squeeze. He just held, the kind of touch that says, "I see you, not I want something." It was a gift. The lantern light made his eyes an amber I hadn't noticed before. I had the sudden aching thought that time had been moving me toward this exact moment. Storm wrapping us. Soup simmering, neighbors nearby, and his hands in mine. Our pulses discovering they were friendly. We let go because the soup needed stirring, because someone needed an extra blanket, because Jensen, the high school kid who bagged at the grocery and had somehow ended up in my store when his car wouldn't start, was shivering and trying hard not to show it. Evan stepped over and put an arm around the kid's shoulders in a way that wasn't paternal or patronizing, just community-made physical. "We're going to be fine," he said. "You pick a number between 1 and 10. If I guess it, you eat first." 7, Jensen said, too quick, and Evan grinned. I was going to say 8, but now I'm going to say 7, and look at that. "I've won." He handed Jensen a steaming bowl and stayed nearby while the kid ate, carefully not staring too much, making it feel normal to be watched over. The radio spoke every half hour with the flat calm of emergency broadcasts. The announcer reminded people to stay off the roads. The sheriff's department gave updates. A volunteer read the names of churches and schools that had opened as warming centers. The station played Ella Fitzgerald that didn't have a weather report attached. When Let It Snow came on, we all snorted and groaned and sang along anyway, because sometimes the old jokes help. We ate soup from styrofoam cups, we warmed hands, we told small stories. In the spaces between, Evan drifted my way like a magnet returning to its mate. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me while we looked out at the storm, as if by measuring it together we could shrink it. He asked about my father, how he'd been doing since the rehab center. I told him the truth. Better, then worse, then steady in a new way that neither of us had quite learned. Evan listened with his whole body, his gaze steady and kind. "I've thought about your dad," he said. "He used to tell us kids at the 4th of July parade to hydrate like it was his job. He gave me a bottle of water once when I was 12, like I was a marathon runner. He'd be proud of this, you know, how you've made a place, how you're taking care." It should not have brought tears to my eyes, but it did, because we never get to choose which words find the soft places. I blinked them away and pretended to check the generator by the back door. Evan came with me anyway. The back hallway was colder, the concrete against our steps echoing. We stood by the door and listened to the storm like it was breathing. The generator chugged its dependable rhythm. A draft found my ankle, slipped into my boot. I shivered, and then pretended I hadn't. "You didn't have to say that about my father," I said. But I'm going to keep it. Evan leaned his shoulder against the cinderblock wall. Take it with interest. I've got more compliments than this town has potholes. I could fix those potholes, I said. A ridiculous thing to say. And he laughed, the sound bright in the gray. He tipped his head, studying me the way you study a house you might want to buy, checking lines, looking for the cracks, but hoping they'll be the kind you can live with. Luke, he said, soft and straightforward, I like you. He had said versions of this in glances and small kindnesses, but hearing it plain made something in me go still, as if the wind outside had decided to honor this moment. I let his words land. I almost let mine meet them. I opened my mouth. From the front of the store, something fell with a crash. We both flinched. Kids, I said, the word holding more affection than worry, and we hurried back. It was not the kids. It was the old steel sign from my father's first business, the one he'd rescued and hung above the registers when I took over. It had slipped its old screws and toppled, thankfully, onto empty space. I put my palm on the cold metal like I was greeting an old friend. My heart was pounding. Evan's hand found my back, a steadying weight. We lifted the sign together and set it against the wall, our movements practiced, as if we'd been carrying the paneled moments of each other's lives a long time already, without admitting it. You okay? He asked. Fine, I said, and he gave me a look that said he knew I meant, I'm scared of being seen, and something just made me more visible to you. Mrs. Callahan clucked and fussed and told us glue and screws had a way of letting go when the barometer dropped. Mr. Deacon made a joke about how he'd always said the sign was too handsome to keep standing, but the sign was not the only thing shifting. Storms have a way of rearranging what we think is bolted down. The hours stretched, elastic, then snapped. We made a game of who snored the loudest, built a fort out of blue tarps, took turns telling stories into the lantern light like we were kids at a sleepover. The Ramirez twins fell asleep on an inflatable mattress meant for a deer stand, their hands facing palm up like they were dreaming of catching snow. Jensen dozed with his head tilted back against a stack of mulch, mouth open, a teenager again. Mr. Deacon tucked his hat under his cheek and slept like men who've known wind. Mrs. Callahan whispered prayers from her rosary, each bead a step closer to steady. Near midnight, the wind hit a new pitch, an angry violin. A low creak rolled across the rafters. I stood, and Evan stood with me instantly, both of us hearing something the others did not. Not alarm, experience. A building talks in a storm. You learn the words it uses. This was a strain in the roof near the back, where the snow load could settle wrong. I took one of the brighter headlamps from a peg, slung it over my baseball cap, and motioned to the back hall. You need help? Evan said. I need a second set of ears. We moved quiet, like not disturbing the air could keep the trouble from noticing us. The hallway was colder now. Snow made a whispering sound against the back door, like a crowd telling secrets. In the old stockroom, we angled the headlamp up and found a thin line of wet at a seam where two panels met. It wasn't a leak yet, but it wanted to be. Okay, I said, keeping my voice calm like I would for a nervous customer trying to fix a hinge. We're going to give this spot some support, nudge the snow from below rather than climbing and risking a slide. The old broom trick, he said, and I smiled because he'd been here long enough to know that if there's a problem, there's a broom involved. Old broom trick, I said. We took two long-handled push brooms and, standing wide to distribute our weight, lifted them carefully to the beam, pressing up, the way you might press your palm to a chest to help a friend breathe. The roof creaked again, then a small, promising pop, the snow shifting just enough. Good, Evan said. You got this. We, I said, the word surprising me with how easy it came. We wedged the brooms, secured their handles to a shelf with bungee cords, and I tugged the shelf to test. It held. The line of damp stopped trying to grow. A small thing, but small things are the bread and butter of safety. I relaxed a little. That's when it happened, the kind of ordinary accident that always feels like a betrayal because you mean so well. I turned, and my foot caught on a loop of garden hose I'd sworn I'd moved earlier in the evening. I tilted, grabbed for the nearest support, found only air. Evan lunged and caught my arm with the precision of a man who has stepped into fast-moving situations more than once. The hose slid, my boots skidded, and then I was planted against him, my palm on his chest, my face so near his that I could smell the clean, honest scent of cold air on his collar. We froze together like a dance we hadn't had time to agree on was suddenly happening anyway. "You okay?" he said, breath touching my forehead. "Fine," I said again, but this time it didn't mean the thing he thought it did. This time it meant, here I am, and here you are. And if I don't speak now, the storm will have taken something from me I can't replace. I swallowed. The words were a door I'd stood in front of, hand hovering over the knob for months. I reached. "I like you too," I said. "More than that, I think about you when the coffee is quiet. I think about you when the store closes and the light falls a certain way across aisle 4. I think about how kindness looks on you like a familiar coat. I know you don't owe me anything, and I'm not asking for more than you want to give, but I would like to try, to see what's on the other side of this." There was a pause. It was a holy thing, that pause. He looked at me like I'd just handed him something he had been afraid to want, a small bird, perhaps, something delicate and stubborn. His hand tightened around my arm, the gentlest anchor. "I've been hoping for that," he said. His voice went a little rough. My name in his mouth sounded like a promise. "I've been hoping, Luke." Relief washed through me, not the dramatic kind that makes you lean out of a moving car window and shout, but the gentle, deep kind that makes your bones feel less heavy. But we had more to do before we could turn into the moment. The store was full of sleeping people counting on us to keep them safe. The roof had spoken once and might speak again. We were tired and cold in a way that eats its sense. And we weren't 16 in a movie. We were men who knew that time mostly takes patience to shape. "We should get back," I said. "Some of them are light sleepers." "Some of us are too," he said, a smile softening his mouth. We returned to the front like nothing had happened because everything had. People murmured in their sleep. A lantern hissed. Someone coughed and turned over. I handed Evan a blanket, and he shook it open, draped it over Mrs. Callahan's shoulders without waking her. He walked past me, his fingers grazing my arm like punctuation. We didn't need to look at each other to feel the change. It was in the way I stood a little closer to him near the heater, the way he handed me a cup of tea like he'd been doing it for years. Time did one of its strange shifts then. The night both stretched on and tuckered out. The storm outside smoothed down an octave. At some point, Mr. Deacon started talking in his sleep about his old mail route, and we stifled laughter like kids. A dog barked far away and was swallowed by distance. It felt safe to rest. We made our beds, such as they were. I gave Evan the good cot, the one that didn't tilt because of the missing screw I kept forgetting to replace. He tried to decline. I insisted like a small-town mother. We compromised. He laid down on it, but kept the blanket folded and handed me the extra. The grin we shared over that little tug-of-war could have lit a room. We pulled our boots near, loosened them but didn't take them off, a habit of people who expect to stand at any moment. "Hey," he said, voice barely above a whisper in the dark. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," I said, the truth of it surprising me. "Were you always the person who makes the room safe, or did you learn it?" I thought about that while the heater sang a low note. My father had made safety look like muscle memory. He had a way of putting his hand on a shoulder that made you remember your own strength. I had learned pieces from him, from my mother, from neighbors who knew how to check on each other without making a fuss. But I had also learned some of it the hard way. In the quiet after my long-ago love had packed his things and left for a city that was brighter than anything I could offer. In the nights I'd lain awake thinking of the ways I could have bent better, been more. In the tender humility of asking for help when I came home to take care of my father and found that nothing about caregiving is neat. "I learned," I said, "and I'm still learning." He turned his head on the thin pillow to look at me across the narrow dark. "I'd like to learn with you." The sentence settled over me like a second blanket. The ordinary glory of it. Not fireworks. A shared class schedule in the school of living. "It made me braver, Evan," I said softly. "I want to be careful of you." He smiled then in the way you can hear when you can't see. "We'll be careful of each other." We slept a little. The kind of sleep you get on carpeting under a hardware store's aging insulation, the kind with one ear open. I woke once to the sound of snow sloughing off the roof, my body automatically calculating load and angle. I woke again to the smell of something sweet. Someone had found the emergency cinnamon rolls I kept in the back freezer for Sunday blues days and had warmed them near the camp stove. I could have kissed whoever had that idea. When I turned, Evan was already awake, eyes on the ceiling, hands folded on his chest, thinking. "Good morning?" I ventured. "Insofar as a morning can be without coffee," he said. "But yes. Good morning." "Cinnamon roll," I offered. "It might be what saves me," he replied solemnly, and when he took it, the smile that lit his face made me think that maybe we could do this. Find the humor, earn the joy, shepherd each other through the storms we couldn't control. The radio offered more updates. Power was out in a swath of the county. The main road into town was impassable, but the shelter at the high school had a nice photo up on the station website. Smiling volunteers ladling soup, kids with coloring books. The announcer read the forecast like it was a parable. Heavier snow easing to flurries by evening, temperatures diving, then rising. People near me shifted, hope turning like a weather vane. The morning seemed brighter, and not just because of the hour. We tidied. We made a fresh pot of broth and added a can of tomatoes someone had stashed and forgotten. We took turns stepping into the back hallway to breathe air that felt like a face wash. Evan and I worked the way two people who like each other work, passing tools hand to hand, predicting each other's reach, catching missteps before they were falls. At one point, bundling trash by the back door to take out when the world allowed, I felt gloved fingers brush the back of my hand and then linger. It was a small touch, but my pulse answered it like a friend. Evan could do nothing halfway. Even in that little contact, there was something steady. When I looked up, he was watching the snow outside, but I could see the lift of his cheek where the smile started. "Do you think I could take you to dinner when all this has sorted itself out?" he asked later, a little too casual for the way his ear went pink. "I think I would like that," I said, "if we find a place that survived the cinnamon roll shortage." "I know a diner that does a mean meatloaf and a decent tune on the jukebox," he said. "I also know how to cook, if you trust me with your kitchen." "I've seen you work a broom," I said. "That's halfway to chef in my book." We turned the ordinary talk into a bridge we could walk over together. We didn't rush to the other side. We enjoyed the walk. That is something I have learned. The best beginnings are gentle on purpose. Through the morning, more stories found their way to us. The Ramirez kids taught Mrs. Callahan a clapping game. Mr. Deacon recited a poem he'd memorized in 8th grade and had never had a reason to share until now. Jensen, shaking off sleep and embarrassment, offered to sweep, and did it with such earnest care that my eyes stung. When he took a break, Evan tossed him a stress ball someone had left near the registers, and they played catch the way men do when words are not the best tool available. "I'm going to check upstairs," I told Evan, meaning the little office I'd made for myself above the storage closet. "Sometimes the roof tells me something different up there." "I'm coming," he said, not because he didn't trust me to climb a set of well-worn stairs, but because we had stepped into a rhythm of together. The office was small, a desk with 3 drawers and a gouge where I'd dropped a wrench, a chair from a yard sale with a creaky back, a window facing the alley. I kept a quilt up there that had once lived on our family couch, the one my mother had made from shirts we outgrew. The window was fogged with our breath before we'd even fully stepped into the room. We stood shoulder to shoulder, peering out at the alley's drifted mouth, the world carved into shapes I barely recognized. In the stillness, I could hear my heart. Maybe he could too. "Luke," he said, and then he stopped. "Because sometimes you say a person's name and it feels like a complete sentence." I turned to him. He reached, the slow, deliberate reach of someone who has built houses and knows the value of a careful angle. His fingers found my jaw, thumb brushing the stubble there, not a test so much as a promise he was writing in my skin. I put my hand over his. The room went quiet in that way that has nothing to do with sound. "May I?" he asked, because consent was the most beautiful habit he owned. "Yes," I said, because truth wanted out into the air like breath. The kiss, when it came, was not cinematic. It was gentle and a little awkward because we were bundled and cold and laughing under the couch quilt I'd pulled around us. His nose bumped mine. My hat slid back and caught on my ears. Our lips found a rhythm that had nothing to prove. A warmth that started at my mouth moved outward, untying knots I didn't know I'd cinched. I did not forget the building. I did not forget the storm. They simply stepped back respectfully to give us the floor for a moment. We kissed and then rested our foreheads together and did that small smile people do when they've shared a secret and are delighted to find that the world did not crack from it. "Okay," he said, breathing carefully. "That is definitely something I want more of. But I also want to do this right." "I like the way you say right," I told him. "Like it's not a rule but a kindness." "It is," he said simply. "To ourselves, to the people who taught us to be good. We didn't let the moment take us too far. A knock on the stairs did the job for us anyhow. Jensen's head popped up as he asked if we wanted cinnamon roll seconds and also if the weather talk on the radio said anything new. Life kept its hand in. We followed it down the stairs hand in hand for a step and then let go. Not because we were ashamed, but because we knew not everything had to be unveiled at once. In the early afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. A strange sound after hours of nothing but wind and friendly noise. I went to the window, lifted the quilted curtain, and saw a man in a bright orange coat with a county patch on the sleeve and a beard filled with frost like sugar. He cupped his hands to the glass and shouted, "We're opening a corridor to the high school. If you can make it 2 blocks east, we'll escort you." Relief, fear, movement, it rushed us like a wave. We nodded. We set to work. There's a choreography to gathering people who have just sat through something together. We packed. We found hats. We tied scarves. We wrote names on scraps of paper in case anything got mixed up. We shook out the last of the blankets. We poured the remaining broth into a big thermos. I left a note on the counter for anyone who might still wander in. Warmth here. If gone to high school, take what you need. Be safe. Evan stood near the door, looking at me with a concentration that felt like another kind of safety. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. We stepped into the cold together. It swallowed us and then let us through. The wind weaker now, the drifted edges soften. We walked in a line, the county man like a crossing guard for a very large, very cold street. His hand up in a command he seemed to direct at winter itself. Evan walked beside me, shoulder to shoulder, as we pushed through waist-high drifts and into the cleared path on Maple. We reached the high school gym and moved into light and noise and the smell of chili and 1,000 damp coats. People cheered, the sound a balm, and we all pretended those cheers were for us and not just a relief-filled habit, because sometimes we need to be cheered simply for arriving.